The moment I opened the door to my wife's storage unit, I went completely still. 41 years. 41 years of marriage, and I was standing in front of a 10 by 20 room in Barrie, Ontario that my wife had rented under her maiden name, paying cash every month. And I had never known it existed until her lawyer handed me the key at the reading of her will. Her name was Evelyn. Not to ask what time thing, not to wish me a happy holiday. My Dorothy, retired school teacher, made the best butter tarts in Simcoe County, drove a sensible Subaru, ran to St. Andrew's Presbyterian every Sunday without fail. Dorothy, who left me a key and a handwritten note that said only, "For when you're ready. I'm sorry it took me this long. I love you more than you'll ever understand." I wasn't ready. I'm still not sure I am. But let me start from the beginning, because this story doesn't make sense unless you understand who Dorothy was to me and who, as it turns out, she was to everyone else. We met at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay in 1981. She was studying education. I was finishing an engineering degree I was already half convinced I didn't want. She was sitting alone in the library with a pile of books and a thermos of Earl Grey tea, and something about the way she looked up at me when I accidentally knocked her thermos off the table, not angry, just quietly amused, told me I was looking at the woman I was going to marry. I was right. We moved to Barrie in 1988 when our daughter was 2 years old. I spent 30 years working for the county. Dorothy taught grade 4 at Cundall's Heights for most of her career. We were ordinary people. Good ordinary people, I thought. We went to the people, I thought. We went to the cottage in Muskoka every August. We fought about money sometimes, and sometimes about nothing at all, and mostly we were happy. I was certain we were happy. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in November of 2022, stage 3. We fought it hard. Surgery, chemotherapy, the whole brutal road. And for a while it seemed like we might win. But by the spring of 2024, it was clear we weren't going to. She died on a Tuesday morning in June, at home in our bedroom, with my hand in hers and our daughter sitting on the other side of the bed. She was 71 years old. I spent the first 3 months after her death in a kind of fog that I think anyone who has lost a spouse of 40 years will recognize. You walk through rooms that still smell like them. You make 2 cups of coffee before you remember. You reach for the phone to tell them something, and then you remember, and the remembering is its own small dip every single time. It was in September that her lawyer called me, a man named Mr. Whitfield, downtown Barrie firm, someone I had never met in my life. He said he had been retained by Dorothy independently years ago, and that there were elements of her estate that he needed to discuss with me outside of the normal probate process. I told him I didn't understand. He said he thought I might feel that way. The meeting was in his office on Dunlop Street. He was a careful, deliberate man, mid-60s, the kind of lawyer who chooses every word like he's paying for them individually. He opened a file folder and slid a single document across the desk toward me. It was the lease agreement for a storage unit at Secure Space on SR Road, Dorothy's maiden name at the top. The lease dated to 2009. "Your wife maintained this unit continuously for 15 years, Mr. Whitfield said. She paid the monthly fee in cash, in person, twice a year in lump sums. She updated her access code regularly. The unit is climate controlled." I stared at the document. "I don't understand," I said. "I said that a lot in that meeting." "She left very specific instructions," he said. "The unit is yours. She asked that you visit it alone, and that you bring the key she left in the envelope." He paused. "She also asked me to tell you that she meant what she wrote in the note." I drove to the storage facility that same afternoon. I don't know why I didn't wait. Something in me needed to know immediately. The way you need to know when you sense that what you're about to learn is going to rearrange everything you thought was solid. The unit was at the end of a long corridor under fluorescent lights. I stood in front of the orange roll-up door for a long moment before I inserted the key. When I lifted the door, I wasn't prepared for what I found. It wasn't money. It wasn't documents. It wasn't anything I had imagined on the drive over. It was a life. Shelves, floor to ceiling, carefully organized. Dozens of binders, labeled by year going back to 1987. Boxes of photographs. A small wooden desk in the corner, the kind you'd find at a garage sale, with a cushioned chair and a reading lamp plugged into an extension cord. On the desk, a single envelope with my name on it in Dorothy's handwriting. And along the back wall, organized in archival sleeves, hundreds of paintings. Dorothy had been a painter. A serious, prolific, disciplined painter for at least 35 years, and I had never known. I stood there in the entrance of that storage unit, and I felt the ground shift under me in a way that had nothing to do with grief, and everything to do with the terrifying realization that the person you have loved most in the world can contain entire worlds you never visited. I opened the envelope on the desk first. It was several pages, handwritten, in Dorothy's precise schoolteacher script. She wrote that she had started painting seriously in 1987, the year before we moved to Barrie. She had taken a class through the Thunder Bay Art Center almost on a whim, and something had happened to her there that she didn't have language for, even now. She wrote that she had fallen into it the way some people fall into fate, completely, and with a kind of terror that the feeling might not last. She kept it secret, she wrote, because she was afraid, not of me. She was careful to say that, afraid of what would happen to something private and sacred if it became public and discussed. Afraid that if she told me, it would become part of our shared life in a way that would flatten it somehow. She had seen it happen to other people. An interest becomes a hobby. A hobby becomes something your spouse encourages at dinner parties. Something enormous becomes a talking point. She didn't want that for this, so she kept it. She had rented a small studio space for several years in the early 90s, she wrote, and when that became too expensive, she had moved everything to the storage unit and worked there on weekends when she told me she was visiting her friend Audrey. I remembered those trips. Audrey lived in Orillia. I had never questioned them. Audrey apparently had known. They had been in on it together for over 2 decades. By the time I reached the end of the letter, I was sitting in the cushioned chair at her desk, and I had been crying for some time without entirely realizing it. She wrote that she was sorry for the secrecy. She wrote that she was sorry for the secrecy. She wrote that she hoped I would understand, even if I couldn't immediately. She wrote that she had spent the last months of her life deciding what to do with the paintings, and that she had made a decision, and that Mr. Whitfield had been given instructions. The paintings she had arranged to donate to 3 institutions: the Maiden Art Center in Barrie, the Thunder Bay Art Gallery, where she had first taken the class, and a small community arts program she had been funding anonymously in Simcoe County for 11 years. The funding. I went back to Mr. Whitfield the following week. He walked me through it with the same careful deliberateness. Dorothy had maintained a separate account, not hidden exactly, but separate, opened with money she had inherited from her own mother in 1994, and that she had managed independently ever since. She had invested it conservatively over 30 years. By the time she died, it had grown to just over $400,000. She had left $220,000 to the arts program. She had left $40,000 to the Thunder Bay Art Center to establish a bursary in her maiden name for students who couldn't afford materials. She had left a remainder of approximately $140,000 to our daughter. Nothing had come out of her joint finances. Nothing had come out of my retirement savings. She had built this entire parallel act of generosity out of something that was entirely her own, and she had managed it without ever once asking for recognition. I didn't know what to feel. I'm still not entirely sure I do. Our daughter didn't take it well at first. She called me the evening after I told her, and I could hear in her voice something between grief and anger, and I understood it, even if I didn't entirely share it. She said she felt like she hadn't really known her own mother. She said she kept thinking about all the Saturdays, all the visits to Audrey, all the years of her secret being kept. Did she not trust us? She asked me. I thought about that question for a long time before I answered her. I think, I said finally, that it wasn't about trust. I think she trusted us completely. I think she just needed something that was entirely hers. My daughter was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That makes me sad for her." "Me too," I said, "and also I don't know, also proud." My son-in-law was less measured. He came to the house about a week later, without my daughter, which should have told me something. He sat down at my kitchen table with the expression of a man who had rehearsed what he was going to say, and he said that he thought a legal review of daughter's independent account might be warranted, given that it had been maintained separately from the marital estate over such a long period. I looked at him for a long moment. I'd always liked my son-in-law in a polite, arm's-length way. I'd never particularly trusted him with anything important. This conversation confirmed that instinct. I told him that Dorothy's account was funded entirely by her personal inheritance, and managed entirely by her, and that she had every legal right to direct it as she saw fit, and that Mr. Whitfield had confirmed this in detail. I told him that my daughter had already received the portion Dorothy intended for her. I told him that the rest was not a subject I intended to discuss further. He said he was just looking out for the family's interests. I said I appreciated that and showed him to the door. My daughter called me that night, mortified. She apologized. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. She said she knew, but she was apologizing anyway because that's the kind of person she is. She got that from her mother. What I didn't tell either of them, what I've told almost no one, is what I found in the binders. Dorothy had documented everything, every painting, dated and titled, with a small photograph clipped to the inside cover of each binder, every class she'd taken, every book she'd read, notes on technique, on color theory, on the painters she admired and why. She had written about it all with the same careful, specific attention she'd given to everything in her life. But in the binder from 2003, I found something I hadn't expected. A section of notes from a retreat she had attended at the Halliburton School of the Arts that summer, and in among the notes, a single folded piece of paper. It was a letter, addressed to Dorothy, written by a man named, the name doesn't matter, a man she had apparently met at that retreat. The letter was not ambiguous in its intentions. It spoke of what had passed between them during those 5 days in Halliburton. It spoke of feelings that clearly went beyond artistic admiration. I folded the letter back up. I sat with it for a very long time. I had two choices in that moment. I could pull on that thread and see where it went, go through every binder, look for more letters, try to construct a timeline, try to determine exactly what had happened and how significant it was, and whether it had ever happened again. I could carry that question like a stone for the rest of my life. Or I could decide that I already knew everything that mattered. I knew that Dorothy had loved me. I knew it the way, the weight of a familiar hand in yours. I knew it from 41 years of ordinary Tuesday evenings and arguments about the thermostat and the way she always saved me the last of the coffee without my having to ask. I knew it from a letter she had written me in her final months that was so honest and so carefully loving that I can't read it without falling apart even now. Whatever had happened in Halliburton in 2003, a moment of something, a brief crossing of a line, I didn't know and wouldn't ever know the full shape of it. It had not been the truth of our marriage. It had been a moment inside a much larger life. A life that she had, in the end, given entirely to me. I put the letter back in the binder. I closed the binder. I placed it back on the shelf exactly where I'd found it. I went home and I called my daughter and I told her I'd been going through some of her mother's things and I'd found something I wanted her to have. A painting. One Dorothy had made in 2018. A landscape of the Muskoka cottage from the dock. The water catching the evening light in a way that I could not believe she had kept hidden from me. It was so beautiful. My daughter was quiet for a long time when she saw it over FaceTime. Then she said, she could have been famous. I know, I said. Why didn't she want to be? I thought about Dorothy sitting in that storage unit, alone on a Saturday afternoon, painting something no one would ever see, and being entirely at peace with that. I think, I said, that being famous wasn't the point. The McLaren Art Center called me in November. They had received the donation and they were planning a small exhibition. Not a retrospective, they said, because they didn't want to overstate it, just a showing. They asked if I would be willing to say a few words at the opening. They said her work was remarkable. The curator, a young woman who chose her words carefully, the way all art people seem to, said that Dorothy's paintings had a quality of sustained attention that was increasingly rare. She said it was clear that Dorothy had been painting for herself, and that this showed in the work. It had no performance in it. I told her describe Dorothy exactly. I said a few words at the opening in February. I stood in a room hung with my wife's paintings, and I talked about Earl Grey tea in a library in Thunder Bay in 1981 and about butter tarts and about 41 years and about how it is possible to love someone completely and still not know them completely, and how that is not a failure. How that might, in fact, be what makes a person worth knowing. There were perhaps 60 people in the room. I don't know how many of them understood what I was trying to say. I think a few of them did. Afterward, a woman came up to me. She had driven down from Aurelia, she said. Audrey, white-haired now, a little unsteady on her feet but with sharp, careful eyes. She said she talked about you every time, every single Saturday. Whatever she was painting, she always managed to work it back around to you. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. She loved this, Audrey said, gesturing at the paintings around us. But you were the reason she could. I drove home from Bradley on a February night, with the temperature at -14 and the highway empty. And I thought about what Audrey had said, and I thought about the storage unit and the binders and the letter I had put back in the binder and would never think about again. And I thought about a woman who had contained an entire world inside a modest life, and had managed, somehow, to keep both of them whole. I'm 67 years old. I live alone in the same house in Berry where I've lived for 36 years. I make 2 cups of coffee sometimes before I catch myself, and sometimes I don't catch myself, and I just drink them both. I have a painting of the Muskoka cottage hanging in the living room now. One Dorothy made in 2022, the last summer we went. The water, the evening light, the dock where we used to sit. I look at it every morning. I still don't entirely understand my wife. I think that's all right. I think that might be the most honest thing I can say about loving someone for a very long time. Some people keep secrets to protect themselves. Dorothy kept hers to protect something beautiful. And in the end, she trusted me with it anyway. That's enough. That has to be enough, and it is. I keep coming back to the desk. The small wooden one Dorothy had in the corner of that storage unit, the kind you'd pass over at a garage sale without a second glance. She sat at that desk for 15 years, alone on Saturday afternoons, and she made something extraordinary without asking anyone's permission or approval. I didn't know about any of it. And yet, somehow, knowing it now, I feel like I understand her more completely than I ever did when she was alive. There's something in that worth sitting with. Dorothy was not a perfect person. None of us are. There was a letter in that binder I chose not to read twice, and I stand by that choice. But what I saw in that storage unit, the discipline of it, the consistency, the 35 years of showing up to something she loved without recognition or reward, that wasn't an accident. That was character. That was the kind of integrity that doesn't perform for an audience because it doesn't need one. She did what she did because it was true to who she was, not because anyone was watching. I think about that a lot lately. How much of what we do because someone might notice. And how rare it is to do something purely because it matters to you, on its own terms, regardless of outcome. Dorothy had that. She built it over decades, quietly, and I think it made her a better person in every other part of her life too. A better teacher, a better mother, a better wife than she might have been without it. When you have something that's entirely yours, something that feeds you at a level other people can't touch, you bring a kind of steadiness to everything else. I saw that in her all those years without understanding where it came from. What I had to learn, what this whole experience forced me to learn, at 67 years old, standing in a fluorescent lit corridor in Berry, is that love does not mean total transparency. It does not mean owning every corner of another person. Dorothy wasn't hiding from me. She was protecting something fragile and sacred until she was ready to hand it over, and she did hand it over, in the end, with her whole heart. That took a kind of wisdom I'm not sure I had given her enough credit for. And then there's what I chose to do with the letter. I've thought about that decision more than almost anything else. I could have let it consume me. I could have let it rewrite 41 years of memory. I had every reason to pull on that thread, but I had enough sense, barely and only because I had spent 41 years with someone who modeled that kind of sense, to understand that the truth of a marriage is not found in its worst moment. It's found in the accumulation of ordinary days. The 2 cups of coffee, the last of the thermos, the painting of the cottage in the evening light. I chose to keep that truth intact, not out of denial, out of clear-eyed recognition that some things are worth protecting, the same way Dorothy protected her painting. You don't always get to understand everything. Sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is decide what you're going to carry and what you're going to leave on the shelf. I'm still learning that. I suspect I will be for whatever time I have left, but Dorothy left me better equipped than she found me, even at the very end. That's not a small thing. That might be the whole thing.